Hello everyone and welcome to another Nature Life Online. My name is Christina and I'm going to be your host today. Now, if you are new to Nature Life, Nature Life are shows that used to happen at the Natural History Museum in London, but when we couldn't do them there anymore because of the circumstances that were happening, we moved them online to keep bringing the science that goes on behind the scenes at the museum and the scientists that deliver that science to you in your homes. Now, these shows are really exciting because they are live, and we invite really special guests to talk about the work at the museum and the specimens that look after. Now, I've got loads of questions for our really special guests today, but because these shows are live, you'll be able to ask your own questions live as well, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible during the show. So send us your comments, send us your questions, and we'll try to answer them during the show. But without any further ado, let me introduce you to our guest today, Emma Bernard, our curator at the museum, but I'll let her tell you more about her role there. Hi, Emma, how are you doing?
Hi, Christina. Hi, everyone. I'm good, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to our show today and preparing all this information about Megalodon and all the sharks for our public. Now, Emma, before we start talking about Megalodon and all the sharks, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do at the Natural History Museum?
Yeah, of course. So I'm actually very fortunate, and I have what is actually really my dream job. I'm one of the curators at the Natural History Museum, and I'm specifically responsible for the fossil fish collection. So I look after about 100,000 specimens, sort of give or take. And as a curator, I need to make sure that we know what they are, where they came from, how old they are. I provide access both to the public and also hundreds of researchers from all around the world that either want to come and visit the collections, or they might want me to send out some specimens to them in order for them to study. I also do part of my own research, which is often on sharks, which is why we're going to be talking about sharks today. I work on exhibitions both inside the museum and outside the museum, and that can either be by supplying specimens or just providing a little bit of context about why they're so special. Along with that, I'm also very fortunate that I get to travel the world and do lots of field work, collecting specimens from all around the world, working with other people as well, bringing them back into the museum to study or to try and work out how they evolved and what was happening with them as well. And also one of the highlights of my job is doing outreach events like today and speaking to the public about fossils and why some of them are actually really cool and exciting.
And we're really lucky that you're always happy to talk to the public about it, because I bet that there's your role, Emma, is also the dream job of many people listening. So you're giving an insight to those people to the amazing work you do. Now, Emma, you said you're curator of fossil fish. Now, we're going to be talking about sharks today, but sharks are fish, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think a lot of people think of sharks as being this sort of own special group almost, but they are actually fish. So similar to cod and herring, they all belong to that group of fish. But we're going to talk a little bit about what makes a shark shortly.
And Emma, when we think about sharks, I think we tend to think about sharks like in the picture that we're seeing with kind of like streamlined bodies, the fins at the back. But sharks are really, really diverse, and there are many different species of sharks out there at the moment, right?
Yeah, that's right. So actually around about the globe, we think that there's about between about 450 to 500 different species of shark that are alive today. But if you take that back into the fossil record, there's probably actually being about 4,500 to 5,000 species of shark that has ever lived. And I'm responsible for a lot of them, as I said, in the museum. And that to me is sort of almost mind-boggling that there's just so many species that have been around, and they're so diverse as well, which makes them a very interesting group to study.
Yeah, some of them are so different to that that straightforward idea that of a shark that we have. Maybe we can have a look at some of them so people can get that feeling of like, oh yeah, sharks are really, they can be really bizarre, they can be very different to what we would expect.
Yeah, so we've just selected a few different types of shark here. As I mentioned, there's over 450 different species of shark today, and they live in all types of environment, and some in deep dark oceans, some right up at the surface, and also in coral reefs. So one of my favourites is the goblin shark, which is the one in the top corner with the big long rostrum or big long nose. We also have the Port Jackson shark, and that's the one that's in the middle with the sort of the strange protrusions just over the back of the skull there. We have quite a small shark in the palm of your hand. That's the dwarf lantern shark. A very strange looking one is in the bottom corner, I think, actually, and that's a tassel wobblegong. And these have got these strange protrusions all over their bodies, and that makes them perfectly camouflaged because they live in coral reefs. So those little protrusions sort of resemble coral reef structures. We have one of the happiest looking sharks, I think, is the whale shark with its big mouth there, and also the Greenland shark, that's the last shark at the end there, which lives really far down in the waters.
There you go. So a really, really good example of diversity. And with this huge diversity, Emma, how long have sharks been around? Because that might surprise us a little bit, I think.
Yeah, so as mentioned, they're fossils. So obviously, when you think of a fossil, they're quite old. But we've got to put together a little timeline here. So just to kind of give a bit of an impression. So we've got bony fish. So as I mentioned, sharks are fish. So we've got bony fish. They evolved about 480 million years ago. And we have sharks, and they first evolved about 420 million years ago. So just to kind of put that into context, we have dinosaurs, and we think of dinosaurs as being very, very old. But sharks actually evolved nearly 200 million years before dinosaurs. And obviously, sharks are still around today. So they make them a very fascinating group of animals to study, and with such a rich diversity and also fossil record there as well.
I think it always blows my mind. You would expect dinosaurs to be these all animals that were on Earth a long, long time ago. They became extinct, but no, sharks have been around for longer, and they're still around today, which is what
Yeah.
is really, really amazing. Now, Emma, we already got some questions coming from the audience, and this one that I think is going to be really tricky for you, but I think I've got to ask it. So Victoria is asking, what is your favorite shark, Emma, if you have any? She particularly liked the dwarf lantern shark as it's so little and cute, but have you got your own favorite?
That is a very difficult question. And in all honesty, I don't necessarily have a particular favourite shark. It sort of changes because, as I mentioned, I work with lots of different people, and when they come into the museum, or at the moment when we're all working at home, I get an email from someone. That's one of the great parts of my job. I'm always learning from other people. So they might be working on the dwarf lantern shark and some of its ancestors. So I'm like, actually, that's quite interesting. I want to learn a little bit more about that. And then somebody else comes in and they're working on Megalodon. So I'm like, okay, let's go and learn a little bit more about Megalodon as well. Because as I said, there's about 4,500 fossil species of shark. And I'm only one person, and I can't know everything about every different species. So again, that's a great thing about the job, and also working with lots of other people around the museum and around the world is just that opportunity to learn. But I think, yeah, so Megalodon's definitely one of the favourites. It's always been there since I was a kid. And I think we're going to come into some of those reasons when we actually go through the show. So, but yeah, I definitely like the dwarf lantern shark as well. It's very cute.
No, Emma, I think it's really cool to be able to have a favorite shark every different day and just be like, oh, yeah, I really like it. No, but I know what you mean about learning. I think that's really, really cool. And also you look after the collection, so you have them there for you to learn more about them. So that's really amazing. Now, before we get on to talking about Megalodon a little bit more, can you tell us a little bit more about what makes a shark a shark? What makes it different from bony fish and other fish?
Yeah, so there's lots of different characters that make a shark a shark. And then that's how you then tell the difference between different families and different species. We also don't have time to go through all of those different details, but I've just picked out a few of the main characters of what makes a shark a shark. So I think the first one, we've kind of touched upon it briefly, is the cartilaginous skeleton. So sharks belong to a group of fish known as the cartilaginous fishes, and that is because their skeleton is made of cartilage and not bone. So the bony fish, so that's things like cod, herring, the fish that you might get from your local supermarket, or your goldfish that you might have at home. Whereas sharks, their skeletons are cartilaginous. So it's made of cartilage, which is very similar to our ears. So if you give your ears a little wiggle at home, you'll find out that your cartilage is actually much softer than bone, so it doesn't tend to fossilize very well. So we've got a picture of a shark skull there, and that's the cartilage. It's calcified cartilage, and then we have the human ear as well. And I did mention, because it's softer, it doesn't tend to fossilize very well. However, in very special circumstances, we do get that cartilage fossilized. So we've got a picture of a piece of fossilized cartilage, and that is a bit of backbone from the skeleton of a 50-million-year-old shark that I was digging up. And so when the shark died, it fell down to the bottom of the water and got covered in sand and mud very, very quickly in something that we call an anoxic environment. So there's no oxygen for even bacteria to come and eat all that soft, fleshy parts. So if we're very lucky and that happens over the course of several hundreds of thousands, even millions of years, that will gradually turn into a fossil for somebody like myself, or even you guys at home, to go out and try and find.
That's amazing, and I think we'll have to touch on that, on cartilage not fossilizing really well later. We've had a lot of questions coming through, Emma. But I'm going to tell people to hold them for a minute, because there's more things that make sharks. And one of the things I really, really find amazing is their skin as well. It's really special, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Actually, the first time I saw this, I can remember as a teenager, and a very close-up image of some shark skin, and it really blew my mind. I was like, this looks so strange, and it just wasn't what I was expecting. So this is a very powerful microscope image. That's an SEM, so a close-up on some shark skin, and they're actually called dermal tentacles rather than scales. And these covered the whole body of the shark, and you'll see that they're all pointing in one direction. So if you were to stroke a shark, not that I would recommend it, but if you were to stroke a shark from the head to the tail, it's quite smooth. But if you go in the other direction, it's very rough, actually. And as I mentioned, because these dermal tentacles point backwards, these make the sharks very efficient swimmers, make them streamlined. And that is one of the reasons why lots of scientists and also companies actually study sharks and their skin. Because they're such efficient swimmers, we can learn from them, to do with the arrangement of these dermal tentacles. How can we use that to improve sort of everyday life? So even companies like Speedo and also companies that make submarines are looking at sharks to see if how they can make their swimwear or the submarines more streamlined and more efficient.
That's amazing. Now, Emma, the gills are also a particular characteristics of sharks that makes them a little bit different to fish, right?
Yeah, so again, the gills are very famous on the side of the shark. We've got these little slits. With bony fish, mostly they're always covered with a little flap, so you actually don't see the gills. But with sharks, they're on display. You can see them there. And typically sharks will have 5 gills. However, there are some species, just to sort of go against the rule of thumb, that have 6.
And let's talk a little bit about teeth as well, because sharks' teeth are quite important. And also you have a challenge for our audience as well, right?
Yes, it is. So I think as soon as you think of a shark, you think teeth. It's one sort of automatic things. So here we've got a picture of a knife-toothed dogfish, and they're related to cookie cutter sharks, and very stereotypical triangular shape tooth there. However, as I said, we've got a question for our viewers at home. I want to know if anybody knows how many teeth a shark has in its lifetime. And I'll give you a clue, it is quite a lot. And shark's teeth are one of the most common fossils that you can find. So we've got a picture there just to sort of show the diversity of some of the shark's teeth. And that's because they're always replacing their teeth. They've got this conveyor belt system of teeth. So I'll give you a clue, it's not as much as 1 million, but it is an awful lot of teeth.
And we'll reveal the answer to this question at the end of the show, so you'll have to stick with us, but send us your guesses as well. Emma already gave you a clue, so let's see what you can imagine. Now, Emma, we're getting loads of questions about megalodons. I think we should start talking about megalodon already. And talking about teeth, you have brought a tooth of megalodon with you.
Yes, I have. So this is a tooth of megalodon, and as you can see, it's about the same size as my hand. Now, the name Megalodon actually means big tooth, and it's pretty obvious from that one there. And what's really cool about these teeth is that even though these teeth are a few millions of years old, they've actually still got the serrations down the side. So if I run my finger up and down, it feels very similar to a knife, and that's because they were perfect for biting into fleshy, meaty things. And as you can see there, yep, so that's me stood next to a reconstruction of a megalodon jaw. Ta-da! So you're already getting a sense of perhaps just how big this shark would have been when it was alive.
But as you said before, sharks' skeleton, the cartilaginous skeleton, is really difficult to preserve. So we don't have a complete skeleton of a megalodon. We have teeth, we have jaws, but not the rest of the body, right?
Yeah, that's right. So unfortunately, we've never found a complete skeleton of Megalodon. But as you mentioned, we find loads and loads of their teeth, and they're very, very common. And we find fragments of their jaws. We find parts of their, little bits of their skeleton, like the vertebrae, and bits of their backbone. And with that, what we can do is we can take lots of measurements from the fossils that we have. And we're very lucky that obviously sharks are still around today, so we can look at modern day sharks and take measurements to try and work out, well, how are these animals growing, and what size are their teeth, what size are their bodies, that kind of thing. So there's a few different ways that scientists over the years have tried to work out just how big Megalodon was. So I've kind of combined a few of them together for us to try and work out just how big Megalodon was. So just sort of put it into context, we have our Megalodon reconstruction at the top there, comparison to a diver, because it's always good to compare it to humans. And we have our great white shark just below that. So we think of great white sharks being quite large sharks that are around today. Typically, they grow to about 6 meters or so in length. And as you can see already, Megalodon was several times bigger than a great white shark. And just for a bit of fun, we've also compared it to a good old-fashioned London bus there.
And I think that gives us already a clue of how big they were. Now, Emma, we've had actually a particular question. Megan, who is 7, is asking, how big was the Megalodon in real life? So should we find out?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, good time. So as I mentioned...
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, so as I mentioned, scientists have used a number of different ways, factors over the years, and we've sort of combined it into one little one. So what we can do is to measure the tooth roll length of a megalodon jaw, and that's because we found partial skulls of megalodon, and also with the teeth as well, we can take the measurements from the teeth. So the tooth roll length is basically from the front to the side of the jaw, so a quarter of the size. So if you times that by 8, that gives you what we call the precaudal length. So basically from the tip of the nose, the rostrum, to where the tail starts. And then depending on the shark, they've all got slightly different tails. And we think Megalodon would have looked very similar to the reconstruction that is on the screen there. So you then times that by about 25%. And then if you were to add all of that up from like the jaw that I showed in the reconstruction, that gives you about 18 meters. So there's also been a few recent studies that have come out, and we think roughly between sort of 15 and 18 meters in length is a good size estimate for how big Megalodon would have been. So again, just to sort of put that in context, so if you were just to focus in on the skull was probably about 4.5 meters in length. So probably could have swallowed up a family car, for example, quite easily. And that dorsal fin, so that fin on the back of the shark that you see sort of going through the water, that would be the same size as an adult. So probably about 1.6 meters in length, which is actually about the same height as myself. So when I sort of stood up and I was reading that, it really helped sort of put that into context of just how big these sharks would have been.
It's huge. And I think, yeah, if the next time you see a double-decker bus, just have a look at it and just imagine double the size of that. And that's how big it would have been. Now, Emma, we had a really cool question from Lauren. How big were baby megalodons? Can we tell?
Oh yeah, that is a very good question. It makes me think of a certain song, which I won't sing just now because it'll get in everyone's heads. But yeah, so baby megalodons, so we call baby sharks pups. And again, so there's been a recent study done where they looked at lots of modern day sharks and how they grew and what their sizes were depending on their age. So we can estimate that probably baby megalodons were about 3 to maybe 4 meters in length when they were born. So they're already very large, formidable sharks, even at just a few days old.
Now, another question about size, Emma. Paola is asking, were females megalodon larger than males, as is the case with a lot of shark species?
That is a very good question. And yeah, as they said, often the female sharks are bigger and there can be some sexual dimorphism between the male sharks and the female sharks. To be honest, I don't think we really know whether you could tell the difference between males and females, but I think it's a good assumption based on, again, modern day sharks and similar relatives that probably the females would have been that little bit larger than the males.
I think it's really important to emphasize that to find out more about megalodon and find it and learn more about it. We look at modern sharks as well, don't we? And sharks that are alive today that we think might have lived similarly. We actually have one question about that, Emma. They asking, did megalodon go extinct, or is it possible that they evolve smaller and smaller into great whites or poor bigger sharks today?
Yeah, so actually for a long time, people, scientists, actually thought that great white sharks were sort of the great grandchild of a megalodon. But as we found more and more fossils, we've actually realised that they're actually two very separate families of sharks. And again, it's just the way that science happens. The more fossils that we find, the more evidence that we find, we're able to sort of put these little jigsaw pieces together. So Megalodon, its lineage goes straight back into the Cretaceous period, so sort of time of the dinosaurs. And Megalodon was the last of that particular lineage of sharks. So it went extinct roughly about 3.5–3 million years ago. That was the end of it. And actually, alongside the megalodon when it was alive, we can find the ancestor to modern day great white sharks. So they're actually living alongside each other as well.
There you go. We're getting a great question from audience. So a question that Josh is asking is, do we know what exactly Megalodon preyed on and what sort of a species? And I think you've got a great answer for that.
Yeah, I think basically whatever it wanted. In all honesty, when you again looking at the size, looking at the teeth, and again specifically, I mentioned the teeth because that gives a really big clue into what animals were eating. The fact that so this is the tooth. It's triangular in shape. It's got the serrated side, as I mentioned, so similar to a knife, perfect for cutting, and a sort of pointy top. So a tooth like that is designed to eat meat. Again, if you look at modern day sharks, so sharks like great whites, like makos, they're very similar. So they're biting into big, fleshy, meaty things. That's what they're designed to do. So probably things like whales, and we know that they were definitely eating whales, relatives to seals and dolphins as well, because again, we find that in the fossil record. So here we have a piece of whale bone, and you can actually see a very iconic sort of 3 scratch marks from a megalodon. And with this, you can actually see, so we've got the yellow arrow there because it is actually a little bit small. It's actually the tip of a megalodon tooth still embedded inside that piece of bone. So actually when that megalodon bit into the whale, the tip of the tooth actually broke off. So again, it's things like whale. So megalodon probably hunted. But also a bit like you and I wouldn't pass up a free meal if somebody offered me something. So we think they probably also scavenged as well. Again, you see that with modern day sharks. You have a large whale carcass, perhaps in the oceans, and you see different groups of sharks and also other animals coming along, not wanting to pass up a free meal. And we've touched on baby megalodons before. So we think that baby megalodons would have lived quite close to the shore in sort of nurseries and sort of popping grounds. And again, we've got some fossil evidence of that, where you can find lots of little megalodon teeth and remains of baby megalodons close to the shore. That's quite common. It's closer you don't have as many of the larger predators that would have been out in the deeper oceans as well. And with that, closer to the shore, you get a much richer diversity of life, so you have lots of small fish. So the sort of smaller megalodons probably would have been feeding on smaller fish, and as they got bigger, they would have moved out into the deeper waters, and then eating things like seals, whales, that kind of thing.
And Emma, did anything eat Megalodon? Was Megalodon the prey of something? And in fact, we had a question coming from an audience saying, did Megalodon eat each other?
Yeah, so it's probably a good question, and they probably did actually. So they may have predated on each other. There was definitely competition from other large animals that lived in the waters as well at this time. So things like the ancestor to the modern day sperm-toothed whale, we've got an example of that there, and also the modern day killer whales. So these animals were much larger than what their modern day ancestors are. Relatives are today. So they would have been in competition for food with each other, and probably also, trying to eat each other as well. Because again, something that large, you're going to need to eat an awful lot of food in order to get the energy to power yourself. And something that's like a large whale or a large shark, you're going to have quite a lot of meat from that as well.
That's brilliant. And Zara is asking, what was the home range of Megalodon? Where are the fossils found, Emma?
Yeah, so actually you can find megalodon teeth on, I think, all continents apart from Antarctica. So they've got a wide distribution. You can even find some megalodon teeth in the UK down near Sussex. However, they've been rolled around an awful lot at the bottom of the sea, so they're quite battered and a bit broken. But mostly the megalodon teeth that you find are around about the tropics and subtropical regions. So very warm tropical waters is where we know megalodon would have liked. So around about the equator, roughly. That's where you find most of the high concentrations, so lots and lots of these megalodon teeth.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emma. We're getting loads of questions. I'm going to try and get through some really, really interesting ones. Ethan is asking, what would be the bite force of a fish that size? Do we know? And are there any ways of knowing, actually?
Yeah, so there have been quite a number of different studies on trying to estimate the bite force of both modern animals and also fossils. Now we have to remember it's a little bit of a guesswork, but however, we can use techniques such as finite element analysis on skulls. So that's basically just sort of taking a scan on an animal's skull and trying to work out how strong those muscles would need to be in order to bite through certain objects. Also, you can do it on modern animals by sort of almost faking the what would be doing naturally in the wild. So sort of placing something in its mouth and measuring how strong that bite force is. And again, you can use that to extrapolate back onto the fossil record. So we believe, by doing a number of these different studies, that Megalodon probably had one of the strongest bite forces of any animal that's ever lived, even stronger than the mighty T-Rex. So there's a few different estimates out there, but roughly it's about 150,000 newtons. So a very strong bite force, and that probably would have been able to bite, as I said, bite through bone, bite through muscle, and would have had a very large head, as we mentioned, sort of about 4.5 meters in size, and would have had quite strong muscles all around about the skull in order to bite through a lot of the thick skin that these whales also would have had that lived back then.
That's amazing. That makes it a little bit more scary. It makes me happy that they're not around anymore. Maybe. Emma, another question about how we can find out more about these species that have become extinct. Can we tell how fast could the Meg have traveled, the Megalodon? This is a question from Natasha.
Yeah, so again, it's looking at modern day sharks as well. However, we've got to be very careful when we try to estimate the speed of any animal, because with the equipment that is used, it's no animal typically just swims in a straight line. And then you've got little bursts of speed that the animal might have had, when perhaps either trying to escape from something or to try and catch the prey. So again, looking at some modern day sharks, so like the great white shark, the short fin and the long fin mako shark, a recent study has actually come out to suggest that Megalodon was probably designed for short, sharp bursts of speed. again, to escape predators and also to capture prey. So for the animals, so these are some of the sharks that I mentioned. We've got the short fin and the long fin mako, the porbeagle shark, and also the great white shark as well. So we can look at those sharks, try and work out how quickly these animals are moving, either at the full pelt when they're swimming very, very quickly, or just gradually, swimming gently through the oceans, which is what they do more often than not. So again, you could use that to extrapolate up. So the short fin mako is one of the quickest swimming sharks. They can actually swim to about 30 miles per hour over short sharp bursts. So yeah, very, very quick swimming animals. So again, you could probably use that to work out roughly how quickly Megalodon would have been able to swim.
So again, looking at animals that we think would have lived similarly to him in the past. And that actually takes me to a question that George has asked. They're asking, what living shark is closest to Megalodon? Are those the ones that we mentioned before, the ones that we think are the closest relatives at the moment?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, when Megalodon went extinct about 3.5–3 million years ago, it completely died out. So there's no ancestors, there's no modern day ancestors around. However, there are other sharks that are slightly closely related. So those are some of the sharks that I mentioned previously. So the short fin and the long fin mako. So sort of from different families, but living in a very, probably very similar lifestyle ecologically.
Brilliant, Emma. I'm being told that we're getting loads of guesses of the number of teeth that sharks can have alive. I don't think we should reveal it just yet because we had a question that might give them a clue. Lauren was asking, how long do sharks live? And knowing that they change, they replace the teeth quite often, and maybe knowing how long they can live for, that might give people a clue. I don't know. Can we answer that question?
Again, it completely depends on the shark. So some sharks may only live maybe 5–10 years. Other sharks, so the great white sharks, probably live about 50 to 70 years. Actually, the oldest living vertebrate is a shark, and it's the Greenland shark, which we shown in one of the earlier pictures. And scientists actually used the lens in its eye to work out how old this shark was, and it put it at about 450 years old. So again, just like the sheer diversity of sharks, their age range is very diverse as well. With regards to how often they replace their teeth, again, it depends on what they're feeding on as well. But some sharks can replace their entire front row of teeth every sort of 2 or 3 weeks. So again, they're always replacing that, so don't have to worry about dentist bills or anything.
Brilliant. Let's see if that helps people. You can change your answer if you've already given us one as well, if you want to, with that bit of a tip. Now, a really good question coming from Hannah and Abby. They're asking, why did Megalodon die out? Why did it become extinct, Emma?
Yeah, so a number of different reasons. So as with the extinction of any animal, or any plant even, it's not just one particular thing. It's normally got a combination of lots of different factors. So about 3.5 million years ago, the climate was getting much, much colder. So as I mentioned, Megalodon like very warm tropical waters. So it just got a little bit too cold. So there was a lot of water being sucked up into the North and the South Pole, into the ice caps. So some of the water that was available, especially close to shore, that was reduced. So probably affecting perhaps where they were going to the Megalodon nurseries that I mentioned earlier. There was also competition from other animals that we've touched upon, so ancestors to the sperm whale, killer whales that are around today, and also probably competition from the great white shark. So combination of getting a little climate change, reduction in food resources, and also competition from other animals as well. But I mean, Megalodon did had a good innings, as they say. So first of all, probably about 23 million years ago, and then went extinct, as I mentioned, about 3.5 to 3 million years ago. So it was around for a very long time. It lived all around the globe, and definitely it goes back to the start. One of my favourite sharks, I think.
Now, Emma, just in case anyone was wondering, there's been loads of films, and at least one big film about Megalodon still lurking at the bottom of the sea, and then suddenly coming up and getting us all by surprise. Such a big shark. So can we actually tell that, Megalodon became extinct, is not around anymore, and what clues do we have to tell us that that is actually the truth?
So, as much as I would love to see a real life megalodon from a distance, I think it's one of those things I've always been fascinated about, is just the sheer size of this animal. I would love to see a real one. However, they are definitely extinct now. We stopped finding any evidence of their teeth. Also something that size, so I mentioned 15, 18 meters in length, with those large, sharp, big teeth, is going to need to eat an awful lot of food, as we mentioned. And again, we find no evidence of any of the large bite marks out of whales or other animals like that, for example. Plus, I think in some films, it apparently lives really deep down in the oceans, which are actually much colder than the water near the top of the surface as well. And there would have been reports of some of these these huge megalodon sharks. So again, a few different factors. There's no fossil evidence or any recent evidence of recent megalodon teeth, because again, we would find recent megalodon teeth, but all the teeth we find are all fossilized and are all about 3 million years old. The climate's different to what it was back then when they were around in the oceans. And again, we just don't see any evidence at all for them around, unfortunately.
There you go. And Louise is actually asking, is it possible to bring a megalodon back to life?
Oh, again, that would be a very good thing to see. I think when you sort of talk about bringing any animal back from extinction, there's lots of ethical questions you actually have to answer. So regardless of whether it is possible or it isn't possible, we're bringing the animal back into a very different environment today than what the environment actually lived there. And what would then be the knock-on implications for the ecosystem all round about it? So you have that sort of first ethical dilemma there initially as well. And then also we just don't have the DNA to extract, and a lot of films make it sound very easy. You just get a little mosquito and find a frog, I think it is, or something. For Jurassic Park. But yeah, it's just, we wouldn't be able to bring back a megalodon. We don't have the it's just not really possible. As much as, again, it would be really great to see a real megalodon, I think. Not sure you could keep one as a pet, but yeah.
I think you'll be first in line to have a look at that.
Yes, I would be, actually.
On a beard, yeah. Now, Emma, we had loads and loads of questions. We had some questions that actually I want to mention it about all the kinds of sharks. So I want to tell our audience that we have another show about sharks. It's in our channel and Facebook channels. But we'll have to invite you again to come and talk about sharks in general, because we're not going to have time to talk about that. But we had a really good question about Megalodon. Do we know if they lived in groups or on their own, Emma? This was from Lev.
Oh, yeah, very good question. So as I mentioned, again, looking at modern sharks, so some of them do live in sort of smaller groups, but mostly they're solitary animals. But the popping grounds that I mentioned, there's some fossil evidence. I think it's off the coast of Peru, where they found this sort of nursery. So alongside finding lots of the smaller baby megalodons and their teeth there. So again, when you're younger, it makes more sense to kind of sort of stick together. But then as you get larger, you're obviously going to come into competition with each other. So you sort of go out and sort of a bit more solitary. However, what we do find there is evidence alongside the baby sharks are also larger, so some of the adult megalodon teeth as well, which again makes sense because it's probably the female shark coming into coastal waters to give birth, where it's a little bit more secluded, a bit more protected than out in the deeper oceans. So they probably would have interacted a little bit, but very much sort of, I think, solitary animals as they got that bit older.
Brilliant. Now, Emma, we're getting to the end of the show, but I don't want to finish the show without actually talking about, sadly, how big films like Jaws or Meg have given sharks, not only Megalodon, but all the sharks also a bit of a bad rep. And you always emphasize to the public how that it's a little bit unfair. So can we talk a little bit about why sharks are so important to be protected?
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, as you say, they've sort of got a bit of a bad PR officer, I think, sharks. I might need to put in a job application for them. But yeah, sharks are so important to the environment. And they really don't deserve the way the media often portrays them as being sort of bloodthirsty, evil animals, because it's really not true at all. In order to maintain healthy oceans, we actually need sharks. So we've got a very simple diagram just to sort of try to help explain that there. So sharks often eat the older and ill fish, for example. So they're helping to keep fish populations healthy by eating those older and sort of ill fish. So so the shark will eat the larger fish, and those larger fish in turn will eat smaller fish, and so it sort of goes down through the sort of simplified food chain here. And these smaller fish eating the algae off the coral. Now, if you were to remove sharks from this equation, so you take sharks away, what's going to happen to those larger fish? They've got nothing, they've got no predators. So therefore, they're going to have lots of babies, and their population is going to multiply. So if you've got a larger population of these larger fish, they're going to be eating more of the smaller fish. So if you're doing that, there are going to be less of these smaller fish around. And again, the knockdown effect for the trickle down is that those smaller fish are no longer eating the algae that are on the coral reefs, and that eventually will just cover up the entire coral reef and will actually kill that entire part of that ecosystem. And there's been examples of that, studies done where sharks have been unfortunately removed through hunting by humans, removed from those parts of the oceans, and that trickle down effect is that that part of the ocean just dies completely. So there's an awful lot of talk about how, as I mentioned, sharks are evil and horrible, and they're out to kill humans. It's not true. On average, there's probably about 10 people or less a year are killed by sharks. And that's often a case of mistaking identity from we in the water, often swimming, splashing around, making lots of noise, often at dawn or dusk, which is when sharks like to hunt. And to put that into perspective, so I mentioned sharks probably kill about 10 people a year. You're actually more likely to die from a cow sitting on you here in the UK than what you are from a shark. But to put that into context, humans are actually responsible for killing over 100 million sharks every year. So that image that we saw there, I think is a very powerful image. Unfortunately, a lot of sharks are hunted because it's like trophy hunting a lot, and also for their fins. Things like shark fin soup, which actually is tasteless. Shark meat is tasteless, so often it's actually flavoured with chicken stock. So you're better off just getting a tin of chicken soup than what you are of shark fin soup. And also it is thought that sharks don't get cancer. And so therefore, if you eat shark, it will help cure cancer. Now, again, that is actually false. Sharks do get cancer. It is rare, but they do definitely get cancer. And by eating any part of a shark, that's not going to, unfortunately, cure cancer within humans. So yeah, it's just really to sort of point out that, mostly when we're out in the water, there's probably several sharks nearby, but they're just really not interested in humans at all. We're not their food source at all. And I think we really need to respect sharks, because without them in our oceans, as we sort of just seen there, that parts of the ocean will just completely die. And obviously we rely on the water and the ocean so much for our day-to-day livelihoods.
Absolutely, and I think we are more dangerous for sharks than them
Yep.
for ourselves, and we should be looking after them because we do need them, and we need them to maintain the ecosystems that they live in. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. You're always so passionate about it, and I think you really sent really well the message. Now, Emma, we've reached the end of the show, but I think we owe our audience our answer. We've got really good guesses as well. David said 50,000 teeth, one more as roughly in the life. We're talking about how many teeth sharks can have in their lives. Vicky, 670,000. We are going with Lauren, we're going to 6 million. Louise, down 620. Shane, 6,000. We're going again into the 100,000 with George. So should we reveal the answer, Emma?
I think so. We've kept people hanging on long enough now, I think, through the show. So yeah, there's some really good guesses there. And I think there was a couple of people that got slightly close. I'm just seeing a few numbers pop up on the screen there. But yeah, so with sharks, typically, so depending on the species, it will vary slightly, but sharks will typically have between 20 and 40,000 teeth over the course of a lifetime. So your average shark will probably have about 30,000 teeth. So as I mentioned, it's because they're always replacing their teeth. And when you think about it, it's a really efficient thing to do because you need teeth in order to eat your food, whether that be whales and seals or whether that be plankton, the microscopic organisms in the ocean. We need the teeth in order to eat. And if you don't have the teeth, you won't be able to eat, so you'll die. So again, a really fascinating thing I think about sharks is that they're always replacing their teeth in order to be able to survive, basically.
And thanks to that, we have the amazing fossils of megalodon tooth and megalodon teeth that we have in the museum, and they're always really, really amazing to see. So yeah, it's a really, really cool thing about sharks. I think we would all love to have teeth replacements, I think. But now, Emma, we've reached the very end of the show. It's been fantastic having you here, sharing so much with us, sharing about Megalodon and its way of life. So yeah, as I said before, we had loads of questions about all the kinds of sharks, all the extinct sharks. So I'm going to have to tell you, you'll have to come back and show with us. But in the meantime, if people want to watch, in our channels in YouTube and Facebook, you can watch a show that Emma did about sharks in general. So there'll be loads of the answers to your questions there as well. So we couldn't get through that many. But thank you so much for sharing your questions. Thank you so much, Emma. I'm going to say goodbye to you now, but see you next time. Bye, Emma.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Once again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you so much for sending so many and amazing questions to ask Emma. We really, really enjoy that engagement and how you really communicate with us and in shows. Now, if you want to know more about the Natural History Museum and the natural world, these shows happen every Tuesdays at midday at 12 p.m. and also on Fridays like today at 10:30 a.m. in the morning. So keep joining us and keep sending your questions. So we have two amazing shows coming up. Next week is Space Week, so we'll be talking about meteorites on Tuesday and then water in the moon on Friday. So don't miss those. But remember that the Natural History Museum in London is now open again and you can visit. It's still free. You just have to book a free ticket on our website and you'll be able to choose the slot of time that you want to come and visit and see the amazing specimens that we have there. We have some specimens on sharks as well. So if you like that, go and visit us. But in the meantime, Nature Live will still to find out more about us. That's all from me. I've been Christina and see you next time. Bye.